So people are dying across the Middle East right now. At least 555 in Iran, including what may be 165 schoolgirls. 4 American troops are dead, and the No More Wars president's telling us there's likely more death to come. And this is the U.S. attacked Iran without congressional authorization, without UN backing, and according to the Pentagon's own closed-door briefings, without intelligence that Iran was about to attack us first. So let's break down what is actually happening, what it's costing, and what comes next. Starting with how it started, right? Because the last chance to avoid this, it played out on Thursday in Geneva. U.S. officials told Iran to give up uranium enrichment entirely for 10 years. Iran's foreign minister said that enrichment was an inalienable right, and Trump envoy Steve Witkoff fired back that the U.S. had an inalienable right to stop them. Right? And then 2 days later, the bomb started falling. The CIA had reportedly been tracking their supreme leader's location for months. And when the agency learned that he and some of the country's top military and intelligence officials would all be together above ground at a government compound in central Tehran, the timeline changed. Because the US and Israel had actually originally planned to strike at night. This was apparently just too good to pass up, and so at Saturday around 9:40 a.m. local time, long-range missiles hit the compound, killing the man who had ruled Iran since 1989. And you had near simultaneous strikes at 2 other locations, altogether killing some 40 senior figures, including the head of the Revolutionary Guard and the country's defense minister. With then U.S. Central Command announcing Operation Epic Fury, and about an hour later, Trump posted an 8-minute video.
Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime, a vicious group of very hard, terrible people. Its menacing activities directly endanger the United States, our troops, our bases overseas, and our allies throughout the world. The lives of courageous American heroes may be lost, and we may have casualties. That often happens in war.
Trump also claimed that this was necessary because Iran rejected every opportunity to renounce their nuclear ambitions, and then he told the Iranian people directly,
"When we are finished, take over your government. It will be yours to take."
Then hours later, Trump confirming the Supreme Leader's death, calling him one of the most evil people in history, and saying heavy and pinpoint bombing will continue uninterrupted throughout the week or as long as necessary. And the second wave of strikes had actually begun almost immediately after the attack on the Supreme Leader, targeting Iran's air defense, especially surface-to-air missile batteries guarding the capital. By midday Sunday, Israel said that it had achieved air supremacy, with a former Israeli Air Force commander putting it bluntly, saying Iran right now is totally exposed to airstrikes. It's only for U.S. forces and the Israeli Air Force to decide where, when, and how. And on the next wave, they went after Iran's ballistic missile systems, right? Munitions, launchers, crews, storehouses, production sites, and you had Israel deploying 200 fighter jets in what it called its largest air operation in history. And as far as how it was divided, you had Israel taking Western Iran and the U.S. taking the East. And you also had Trump targeting Iran's Navy, posting, "I've just been informed that we have destroyed and sunk 9 Iranian naval ships, and adding, we are going after the rest. They will soon be floating at the bottom of the sea also." With the US and Israel also striking dozens of military command centers, including the main IRGC headquarters. With CENTCOM posting, the IRGC killed more than 1,000 Americans over the past 47 years. Yesterday, a large-scale US strike cut off the head of the snake. And so with all this, as of recording, you have the Iranian Red Crescent Society reporting that the attacks on 131 cities have killed at least 555 people. And the most horrific attack we've heard about so far apparently happened on Saturday, where with Iranian state media reporting that U.S.-Israeli strikes at a girls' school killing 165 people, mostly children. You also had the New York Times verifying videos and images showing at least half the school destroyed. With it being reported that the school sits next to a Revolutionary Guard naval base, and footage shows emergency workers and families digging through the rubble littered with school books and bags covered in blood and ash. As far as Iran, they're not just kind of absorbing this quietly. They've been hitting back at Israel and the Arab Gulf states that are hosting U.S. forces, and the damage, I mean, it's already spreading across the entire region. Right, this weekend you had Iran striking a base in Kuwait housing American troops, killing 3 Army soldiers and a supplies and logistics unit. 5 more were seriously wounded. Several others sustained shrapnel injuries and concussions. And actually today you had a 4th American confirmed dead after dying from wounds from Iran's initial attacks. You also had a missile strike on an Israeli city, killing at least 9, injuring 27, bringing Israel's total death toll to 11 as of recording. Hezbollah has also begun launching rockets and drones towards Israel overnight, with Israel also responding by striking dozens of targets in Beirut and southern Lebanon, killing at least 31 and injuring 149. You also had an Israeli official saying that the military has launched an offensive in Lebanon that could include, quote, many prolonged days of combat ahead with all options on the table for a ground operation. You then also had an Iraqi Shiite militia claiming a drone attack on U.S. troops at Baghdad's airport, though there were no reported casualties. And then you had the Pentagon revealing that 3 U.S. fighter jets went down over Kuwait in an apparent friendly fire incident late last night. Though reportedly all 6 aircrew ejected safely and they're in stable condition. But even all that, right? How many and thens can I have? Even all that, it doesn't capture the full scope here. But as far as the regional fallout in Syria, and an Iranian missile likely meant for Israel killed 4 people. In Kuwait, beyond the base attack, a drone hit an airport, debris struck an oil refinery, and smoke was seen rising from the U.S. Embassy this morning. 1 killed, 32 injured overall, and then in the UAE, 3 dead, 58 wounded, with drone debris setting an airport and a 5-star hotel on fire. Then in Bahrain, right, home to the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet, they say they intercepted 61 missiles and 34 drones, but shrapnel from one killed at least 1 person, and some strikes got through entirely, hitting buildings in the naval base. Also, Qatar says that it intercepted attacks targeting civilian infrastructure, including its international airport. And as all of this is playing out, there's also an economic ripple effect that you're seeing that's massive. Right, a Qatari state-owned energy company, one of the world's top LNG suppliers, halted production, sending European gas prices surging as much as 54%. You also had a drone hitting an oil tanker in the Gulf of Oman, killing 1 crew member. A major Saudi refinery was targeted, production halting there despite reportedly limited damage. You then had the IRGC claiming 3 attacks on commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz, which handles about 1/5 of the world's traded oil. And regarding oil prices rose nearly 10% today, and they could keep climbing. You've also got shipping companies diverting vessels around Africa to avoid the Suez Canal. You're also seeing hundreds of thousands of travelers stranded as mass cancellations hit some of the busiest airports in the world. And in Pakistan, 22 people were killed trying to storm the U.S. consulate. And so then with all that, there is the question of, well, what is the White House actually saying about why this was necessary? Well, on Sunday, you had Pentagon officials reportedly acknowledging in closed-door congressional briefings that there was no intelligence suggesting that Iran planned to attack American forces first. Instead, their argument was that Iran's ballistic missiles and proxy forces posed an imminent threat to U.S. interests. And with that, as Trump has claimed, Iran would soon be able to strike the United States with a ballistic missile, though he provided zero evidence. Sources say that his claims aren't backed by U.S. intelligence, and experts and official reports both push back on the idea that Iran's missiles could reach the United States. Right? And then you also had Trump telling reporters they weren't willing to stop their nuclear research. They weren't willing to say they will not have a nuclear weapon. Very simple. But there's actually no credible evidence Iran was actively building a nuclear weapon. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency has said that Iran doesn't have a weapons program, and America's own intelligence backs that up. But with all that said, right, there's the question of, well, what comes next? This has happened. It is currently happening. How long is this going to last? And there you had Trump telling reporters.
And we have, right from the beginning, we projected 4 to 5 weeks, but we have capability to go far longer than that. We'll do it.
He has also acknowledged more than once that more American casualties are expected, saying,
and sadly, there will likely be more. Before it ends, that's the way it is. Likely be more, but we'll do everything possible where that won't be the case.
On the question of, what replaces the current regime, you had Trump saying he'd like Iranians to rise up, but there's no guarantee that successors would govern any differently. He also reportedly floated several competing ideas for how power could transfer, including keeping the existing structure in place with leaders more subservient to U.S. interests. He also talked about applying the Venezuela model, even as advisors have told him that the cultural and historical differences make that nearly impossible. And then also, Trump said he has 3 very good choices for who could lead Iran, though he wouldn't say who they are. And for now, what's left of the Iranian regime is reportedly set to choose a new supreme leader any day. But in the meantime, we're left to wonder what happens from here. Reportedly, hundreds of civilians are dead, including kids. You have 4 American service members so far dead. The entire region appears to be destabilizing. We've got constantly shifting public justification for why this happens, with the evidence not seeming to support most of it. Right? And well, obviously, we're all hoping for whatever the best outcome is here. That the president's exit strategy appears to be hoping that a country of 88 million people spontaneously overthrow its government and also installs leaders that we approve of. Right? But then also, with our No More Wars president starting another war in the Middle East, we need to talk about the fallout that's splitting both parties and exposing fault lines that could really reshape the midterms. Republicans in general are cheering regime change. Democrats in general can't agree on how to push back. Candace Owens and Marjorie Taylor Greene, they're blaming Israel, and someone just made $500,000 betting on the Supreme Leader's death. Right, so let's get into it. Starting with on the right, the messaging is simple. This was a win. Right, and with that, you had Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth framing the strikes as a necessary response to Iran targeting the U.S. military and interests around the world. Right, and Hegseth also added that while this isn't officially a regime change war, the regime will be changing, and that's a good thing.
Turns out the regime who chanted death to America and death to Israel was gifted death from America and death from Israel.
You also had Senator Lindsey Graham taking it even further on Meet the Press.
I don't know if this is technically a war, but here's what I can say the headline is for me Sunday. The mothership of terrorism is sinking. The captain is dead. The largest state sponsor of terrorism, Iran, is close to collapsing.
But then when pressed on what comes next, you had Graham insisting that the U.S. won't be choosing Iran's next leader, and there are no plans for boots on the ground.
It's not his job or my job to do this. How many times do I have to tell you? Our job is to make sure Iran is no longer the largest state sponsor of terrorism, to help the people reconstruct a new government, no boots on the ground.
And then on the other side of the aisle, like with the Democrats, it's a mess, and that's kind of putting it charitably. Some Democrats are defending the strike outright, like Ohio Representative Greg Landsman. You also have others like Senator Mark Kelly trying to thread the needle, agreeing that the world is safer with the Supreme Leader dead, but warning, hope is not a strategy. We've got to have a plan here. What is the strategic goal, and how do we achieve it? In California Governor Gavin Newsom and Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, they struck kind of a similar tone, condemning the Iranian regime while also slamming the administration's approach. Then also, you've got Democrats who aren't hedging at all. Right? Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez accused Trump of lying to the American people and making a deliberate choice of aggression when diplomacy and security were within reach. You also had Senator Bernie Sanders calling the war unconstitutional and a violation of international law and saying, we must not allow Trump to force us into another senseless war. And so with that, very likely the next concrete move, it comes later this week, right? Because you have both the Senate and the House expected to vote on resolutions requiring Trump to get congressional approval before any additional military action in Iran, invoking the 1973 War Powers Resolution, which was actually passed after Vietnam, specifically to check presidential war-making powers. And to be clear, that's in addition to the Constitution already requiring Congress to approve any declaration of war. This vote is about enforcing that. And so with all this, you have Representative Ro Khanna calling for every lawmaker to go on the record with their vote, but he's also being honest about the math. And while Khanna admits that this resolution is very unlikely to pass, he argues that just something has to be done to at least attempt to rein it in. But also, I think for a lot of people watching, this feels a little like too little, too late. Right? And also a part that's hard to ignore is that a core piece of Trump's platform in both elections was no more wars. And it's why if you hop online, you see just so many people compiling clip after clip of Trump accusing Obama of planning to attack Iran to save face or project toughness. You know, the irony, the hypocrisy, whatever you want to call it, it is not subtle. And actually one of the loudest voices pointing that out is Candace Owens.
We need a pretext for war. Like we always need a pretext where we're constantly bombing and killing people all the time. We're committing a Holocaust in Gaza. Could you just go out there and tell them they were building a nuclear bomb? They weren't. And there's been no evidence of that outside of Bibi Netanyahu's trust me, bro, because I guess you have to come up with something to make people hysterical to believe that we have this never-ending right to murder human beings in the Middle East, to use American soldiers to effect regime changes in the Middle East at the benefit of no one but Israel.
You also had Marjorie Taylor Greene agreeing, calling war with Iran, America last, and writing, Americans are once again coming home in flag-draped coffins from another stupid, pointless foreign war for foreign regime change on behalf of Israel. With Greene then also turning to Laura Loomer, who praised the American soldiers killed in action this weekend and applauded their families, and Greene's response was just scorching, calling Loomer this bitch who's celebrating the death of American military members and adding, sign up for the military, Laura. Go to the front lines, Laura. You don't love Trump enough unless you go fight Iran yourself. Which, just to add context for the normies out there that don't live and breathe this is Marjorie Taylor Greene going after Laura Loomer, right? These are, I mean, you used to think two of Trump's most devoted supporters now publicly going after one another over a war that Trump started, right? That by itself, as well as, the things we've covered over the last year, it tells you something about how deep these fractures run. And then on top of all of that, there's a part of this story that feels like it belongs, I don't know, in a different timeline, but it isn't. Polymarket reportedly saw roughly $530 million in contracts tied to the Iran strikes. Some of the activity, it sparked serious red flags. You've got Bloomberg reporting that 6 accounts made around $1 million each betting on the February 28th strike date. All 6 were freshly created that month, and all of them only ever placed bets on strike-related contracts. Some even purchased shares just hours before the news broke. And so you had Bloomberg noting that these are hallmarks that blockchain analysts associate with insider trading. And then also, there's a trader called MAGA My Man who made over $500,000 betting specifically on the Supreme Leader's ousting and death. And then over on Kalshi, there was a similar situation playing out, but with a twist, because that platform had bets on whether the Supreme Leader would be out of power. But once his death was confirmed, people who bet yes, they didn't get paid. So with that, you had Kalshi CEO explaining, we don't list markets directly tied to death. When there are markets where potential outcomes involve death, we design the rules to prevent people from profiting from death. And so Kalshi is refunding fees and paying out based on last traded prices before the death was announced. But still, the outrage hasn't died down. You had Senator Chris Murphy saying it's insane, this is legal, saying people around Trump are profiting off war and death. I'm introducing legislation ASAP to ban this. With all that said, I'd now like to kind of turn the tables. I'd love to hear from you in those comments, whether it be about the strike itself, the Democratic response, the Israel angle, the Polymarket scandal, any and all. Right, let me hear from you in those comments down below, especially because at least on YouTube, I have now the ability to respond with audio. So I'm going to be testing that out over the next 24 hours. And then there's more we've got to dive into in just a minute. But first, let me thank a sponsor and say, raise your hand if you've been meaning to book a doctor's appointment for like 6 months now. Whether it be dental cleaning, annual checkup, a weird thing, keep pretending's probably nothing, all of it. And that's why today's sponsor, Zocdoc's, actually useful. Zocdoc's a free app and website that helps you find and book high quality in-network doctors so you can find someone that you love. No phone phone tag, no being on hold while a flute solo destroys your will to live. You can search by specialty or symptom. So whether it's primary care, dental, derm, eye care, or a bunch of other specialties, you can find what fits. And what I love, you can also choose what works for you, in-person visit or video visit. And you can read verified patient reviews, so you're not going in blind and hoping that your doctor has a personality. Well, actually, I'd say the best part is that you can see real-time availability and book instantly. And there's a lot of appointments that happen pretty fast, sometimes even same day. I've used it myself, and I've also booked an appointment faster than I could talk myself out of it. So hey, stop putting off those doctor's appointments and just scan that QR code or go to Zocdoc.com/Phil to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/Phil, Zocdoc.com/Phil. This message is sponsored by Zocdoc. But then, diving right back into the news, we need to talk about how 3 mass violence events happened in 12 hours this weekend. You had a shooting in Austin, now being investigated as terrorism, a mass shooting at a Cincinnati music venue, and a fatal stabbing spree on a DC highway. And so starting with Austin, early Sunday morning, you had a gunman opening fire outside of Buford's Backyard Beer Garden on 6th Street, which is one of the most popular nightlife strips in Austin and right near the University of Texas campus, with police identifying the shooter as Ndiaga Gianya. Investigators say that he circled the block multiple times and stopped in front of the bar, turned on his hazards, and just started shooting at people on the patio and sidewalk. He then reportedly drove further down the street, parked, walked back toward the bar, and then opened fire again on foot. Right then, because there was already a heavy police presence in the area, the officers were able to intercept him before he could do more damage.
What the is going on? Jesus Christ! What the?
And ultimately, you had 3 dead, 2 bystanders and the shooter, as well as 14 others being injured, 3 critically, and some of the victims were UT Austin students. Now also, here's where the story kind of gets bigger. Right? The shooter reportedly wore a hoodie that read "Property of Allah" and had a t-shirt with the Iranian flag. He also, according to reports, had been posting about support for the Iranian regime and hatred for Israeli and American leadership since roughly 2017. And the authorities also said that they found items in his car that raise even more concerns.
Obviously, it's still way too early in the process to determine an exact motivation, but there were indicators that on the subject and in his vehicle that indicate potential nexus to terrorism. Since it's a matter we're looking at it as a potential matter of terrorism, obviously the Joint Terrorism Task Force is engaged. In terms of specifically what type of terrorism, we're just at this point prepared to say that it was potentially an act of terrorism.
Now, as for any more background, you have reports saying that the shooter first entered the U.S. in 2000 on a tourist visa, became then a lawful permanent resident after marrying a U.S. citizen, and was naturalized in 2013. And with all this, you had Texas Governor Greg Abbott releasing a statement calling it an act that will not define us and warning that Texas will respond with decisive and overwhelming force against anyone who tries to use the Middle East conflict to threaten the state. Right, and all in all, this is actually the biggest mass shooting in Austin in 60 years, which is also why you had, at least as of recording, many people wondering why the president hasn't addressed it. But that then brings us to Cincinnati, where around 1 a.m. on Sunday, just hours before Austin, shots were fired inside a Riverfront Live, a music venue in Cincinnati that was hosting an event. And here, 9 people were injured, 1 critically, 5 were in stable condition at UC Medical Center, 2 were released, and 1 was treated and released at another hospital.
We do not have any further information on the victims or what started this or any information on the suspect or suspects at this time.
Now with this, you had a witness describing hearing shots, then a quick pause followed by screaming and running, saying that she wanted to get out of harm's way but didn't know where the harm was actually coming from. You also had Cincinnati Mayor Pureval thanking first responders, but also being blunt about a bigger problem.
Our laws make it so easy to get a gun in our community that a lot of people have guns. Coupled with the fact that they refuse to deal with disagreements peacefully, to the extent that they not only refuse to deal with disagreements peacefully, but they immediately run to mortal danger. As you can imagine, our law enforcement leaders, our city leaders are very, very focused on what we can do to prevent people from getting access to guns.
And then all of that brings us to DC, where you had a man reportedly stabbing 4 people and a dog with a knife on the Capitol Beltway after what witnesses said started as a road rage incident following a crash on I-495. And here, 1 victim, a 39-year-old woman, she's dead. The dog was also killed. The status of the other 3 victims, that's unknown. And you had a witness telling CNN that he saw 2 cars that were kind of banged up and then 2 people covered in blood while there was a woman trying to stop the attacker, but the man just kept swinging his knife. And then when a state trooper arrived, the man reportedly approached him with the knife and he was shot. With him then taken to the hospital with serious injuries, and he's since been pronounced dead. Right, and actually with this, one of the details that kind of stood out to people is you had the DC Police Department posting on social media that the reports of a mass stabbing incident, they were incorrect, and that the MPD wasn't investigating any matter like that. So you had many wondering how were 4 people stabbed, 1's dead, and it didn't meet their threshold. And as I was going through this news, it was kind of that last part that was a punch in the stomach, but it felt like maybe almost the core thing to all of them. It's not the only thing that matters, but it kind of just stands out that the violence, it's just become routine. And it's also something Cincinnati City Council member Cheryl Long put in terms that are really hard to shake.
Like all of us, I'm heartbroken to witness such a senseless act of violence. But unfortunately, I am not shocked. So many of us in America are in a similar state of unease, not wondering if a shooting like this will occur, but when. The stress, the exhaustion, the confusion, they are constant. That moment when your heart drops because it's happening again is something we're all terrifyingly used to by now.
So, it's important to acknowledge where we are. Don't let it fully get lost in the mass understand where the baseline is now. That's how you know where to try to go to get things to a better place. But yeah, we are currently in a situation where we're not left wondering if the next one's gonna happen, it's just when. And with every day as we get closer to the midterms, and even before then to the primaries, we need to understand there is a question that nobody in power seems willing to want to answer. How much more normalized does this get before someone actually does something about it? And then actually, while all eyes are understandably on Iran's nuclear program, we also have to talk about this other country that's making very, very big moves. And that's because France is building more nuclear weapons for the first time in over 3 decades. And it's not just the expansion that matters, right? It is why it's happening and what it signals about how much Europe trusts the United States right now. Because you had French President Emmanuel Macron announcing that his country is increasing its nuclear arsenal. It's the first expansion since 1992. And while he didn't give a specific number, according to the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist, France currently holds just under 300 warheads. And you have experts saying that a dramatic expansion is actually possible given the high levels of weapons-grade uranium and plutonium the country is believed to have. But also the warhead count, it's not even the biggest story here. What really stands out is the cooperation piece. Because France has actually long insisted on keeping its nuclear program fully independent. But that's changing now. As part of this buildup, Macron said that France will expand nuclear cooperation with European allies, including allowing other nations to participate in war game drills and offering to temporarily deploy nuclear-capable fighter jets to allied countries. All while making clear that the French president retains sole authority over any deployment decisions. But even with that caveat, this is a landmark shift in doctrine there. France is actually the only EU member state with nuclear weapons and one of just 2 nuclear powers in all of Europe alongside the UK, which relies on the United States for technological support. And that means that most European countries actually depend almost entirely on America's nuclear umbrella, right? The long-standing security guarantee that US nuclear forces will be used to defend allies if they're threatened. But now with Trump, that umbrella is looking a lot less reliable, right? You have European leaders raising serious concerns about Trump's wavering commitment to the region. This unprecedented shift in US foreign policy that has shaken decades of transatlantic security beliefs. And in fact, Macron framed the expansion as a direct response, citing a recent US national security strategy that signaled a clear, quote, reorganization of American priorities. And he argued that this should push Europe to, quote, take more direct responsibility for its own security. Or in other words, if America won't guarantee Europe's safety anymore, France is volunteering to start filling that gap. As far as why this matters, I think it's really important that people understand what's happening here. A major Western democracy is expanding its nuclear arsenal for the first time in 33 years, not because of a new enemy. Yes, they're worried about Russia, but also because it no longer trusts its oldest ally to actually show up. The fingerprints of that fact, they're on everything that's happening right now. And also, we should expect to see the ripple effects going beyond France, right? If this leads to a broader European push toward independent nuclear deterrence, it fundamentally reshapes the global security order that's held since the Cold War. And ultimately, one of the biggest questions now is whether this is going to make Europe and its allies safer, or we're just entering a new arms race. And that's on top of the arms race it already felt like we were having. Right, but then from that, the final bit of news that we should talk about today is that Democrats say they now have the votes to subpoena Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick over his ties to Jeffrey Epstein. And if the midterms go their way, they're already signaling that they'll go after Trump next. In the meantime, you've got both sides spinning what Bill Clinton allegedly said about Trump during his closed-door deposition, and neither version appears to line up. Right, so where we'll dive in is that you had Representative Ro Khanna going on Meet the Press yesterday, and he said it plainly.
We have the votes to subpoena Lutnick. I'm working with a Republican actually to subpoena Howard Lutnick next week, and I believe he will come before the committee.
And while I didn't say who that Republican was specifically, you have people pointing to Nancy Mace, who just said she would call Lutnick to testify. The pressure, it's been building on him for a while now. The Epstein files appear to suggest that Lutnick lied about the timeline of his relationship with Epstein, and it shows the two emailing after Epstein was convicted of sex crimes. Then, over the last couple of days, the DOJ briefly removed a photo of Lutnick from the files. And that image shows him with Epstein on Little St. James, right? Epstein's Island. And while an official claimed that the photo is part of a batch flagged for a nudity review, there's no nudity in that photo. And so you have politicians on both sides demanding answers about why it was pulled. But despite all that, Trump's standing by Lutnick, right? When asked about the possibility of a House deposition, Trump called him a very innocent guy doing a good job. But all of that, it brings us to Bill Clinton, who sat for his closed-door deposition on Friday, which was about 6 hours of questioning, which was actually shorter than Hillary's, despite her insisting that she had never met Epstein while Bill is actually pictured in the files. And ahead of the hearing, you had Bill saying that he knew nothing about Epstein's crimes, but he agreed to testify because he believes, quote, no person is above the law, even presidents. And because the footage hasn't been released yet, you've had both parties already spinning what he said, especially about Trump. You had Republican Chairman James Comer stepping out to tell reporters that the Democrats asked Clinton whether Trump should testify, Clinton saying that that's for you to decide, and he added that Trump has never said anything to me to make me think he was involved with Epstein. Comer then also posted that Clinton exonerated President Trump under questioning from the Democrats and accused Democrats of weaponizing this investigation to put politics above survivors. The Democrats on the committee, they fired back immediately, saying that's not how it went down. Their statement said that Clinton raised more questions about the relationship between President Trump and Epstein, and specifically with regards to the reason their relationship ended. They called Comer's characterization flat out wrong, noting that Clinton confirmed that he knew Trump and Epstein had a close relationship and that Trump reported having great times with Epstein. And that is, you also had other Democrats pointing out the obvious. Even if Clinton said he had no personal firsthand knowledge of wrongdoing, that wouldn't exonerate anyone. But that's not how any of this works. And so, also with this, we don't actually know what was said until the footage drops, but that's also exactly why closed-door depositions followed by competing press conferences is such a problem. You get two completely different narratives before anyone checks the tape, which I think is what some people want. And this is also where the politics kick in, because you have Democrats arguing for weeks now that Trump needs to answer questions about Epstein. Now, with the Clinton depositions done, they're framing it as precedent. You had Representative Robert Garcia, the committee's ranking Democrat, putting it this way.
Republicans have now set a new precedent, which is to bring in presidents and former presidents to testify. We are now asking and demanding that President Trump officially come in and testify in front of the Oversight Committee. He appears in the Epstein files next to Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell almost more than anybody else.
Now, do we think that any of this is actually going to happen right now? No. Most Republicans, they're still defending Trump, and there is zero chance the current House majority brings him in voluntarily. But one of the big things here is that Democrats are making this a midterm issue, right? You have Garcia saying that if the House flips and he leads oversight, the committee will absolutely pursue an interview with Trump. They've even floated bringing in Melania. And in fact, you even have the Washington Post reporting that Democrats are already charting an aggressive strategy of investigating the Trump administration next year. So for now, we'll have to wait to see what happens in the short term, right, with Lutnick, and the long term with the midterms and then Trump and Melania. Then, of course, also the bigger question hanging over all of this is whether any of this leads to actual accountability, right, for anyone or any side, or it just becomes another political football that both parties use to kind of try to score points while you have survivors waiting for actual justice that never ends up coming. And while we wait to see how all this plays out, I'd love to know your thoughts, opinions, reactions, maybe even predictions. Let me hear from you in those comments down below. But that right there, my friends, you beautiful bastards, is the end of your Monday Philip DeFranco Show dive into the news. But today, there's also actually more to watch right after. You can click or tap. I've got links in the description, but we had an emergency episode of the Crashing Out podcast, of course, everything with Iran. Or if you ended up getting to this video a little later than intended, you can watch the newest Philip DeFranco Show right there. But no matter what you do, let me just say, I love yo faces, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow. It's called Operation Epic Fury. Isn't this the most based attack ever?
Millennials are never going to be able to live this one down.
Don't put this on millennials. Don't put this on millennials.
Well, I guess our tax dollars are blowing up kids in schools again.
This is not defending Schumer. Fuck Chuck Schumer.
You don't need to read all of Project 2025. Just pull up Trump tweets from 2014.